So this is completely downloadable on our website, which I put up there. And then I got about 5 different brochures on, on the pill, like the pill kills. If it's not okay for him to take steroids, why is it okay for her? Because, you know, the pill is a sex steroid. That's that one. And I got one that is more pleasant, like what smart women know before they can use the pill, so doctors wouldn't be embarrassed of giving them to their patients. All of them have the medical references on the back. And then this one is about the abortion breast cancer link, because originally that's what Debbie wanted me to talk about. So I have, those things are all downloadable on that website, or you can email us and we'll send them to you. Okay, now questions. Yes.
So if someone was on the pill for like a long time, like 5 years, and got off of it, like are they just permanently like damaged, or?
No, forever and ever, you mean?
Yeah.
No, because, well, okay, I'll give you an example. The pill increases the risk of breast cancer. But the people that are pushing the pill always say, oh, but after a while, you know, your risk goes back to normal. Okay, why is that? Because if you're unlucky and you have taken the pill and it causes one cancer cell to form, to go from 1 cell to 2 cells, because that's how cancer grows, 2 cells to 4 cells, 8, 16, 32, to something 1 centimeter in diameter, about the size of my thumbnail. It takes 8 to 10 years. So if you took the pill, and it's 8 or 10 years later, you're not going to get breast cancer from the pill. You'll get it, could get it from something else, but it's not going to be from the pill. You would have had it by now, or it would have been detected. So, I think that a lot of the stuff is going to be reversible, because what is the mechanism for these structures in the brain to change? It's like, what is it doing to the receptors? So if it's glomming onto that receptor and causing certain things to happen, when you take away that stimulus, it can regenerate. And the brain is very plastic. You always think, oh, you know, you have a problem with your brain and you screw up a certain part of it and you'll never get it back. That isn't really true. You can get a lot of stuff back. So I don't think that there's damage forever and ever, amen, from that. Yes?
So the pill works by imitating pregnancy rates. So do pregnant women have some of these effects happen to them? Since especially when it takes like 2 months to start seeing the effects?
No, this is so basic. So they get a lot of stuff, but no. And the reason is that, first of all, there are different types of estrogen that affect the receptors. So we talked about estradiol. So estrogen, I have to start it. So when you're pregnant, you make a lot of estriol and not estradiol. So diol is very potent, but estriol isn't. So if you look at a chart, your estrogen levels go way up, but a high percentage of that stuff is estriol. So I think that's all about how fearfully and wonderfully we're made. So when you when your estrogen and progesterone stimulates your breast to double in volume when you're pregnant, the first 20 weeks. And it does that because you need a certain amount of breast tissue to produce milk. And in the after 32 weeks, they mature to cancer-resistant breast tissue that doesn't form cancers. So when the pregnancy would be a very scary kind of place to develop breast cancer, because you're multiplying all those cells, you're doubling the number of cells that you have, globules that you have. You would think, oh, if I have a mutation, I'm going to have, more mutations and maybe get a cancer cell and maybe get breast cancer while I'm pregnant. But what happens is that human placental lactogen made by the fetal placental unit, made by your baby, causes you to make more inhibin. And an inhibin is a cancer suppressor protein that fixes mutations. So that's part of how fearfully and wonderfully we're made, and everybody who gets pregnant doesn't have all these horrific things and breast cancer. So, I don't know. Yes?
What's like a safer alternative method of contraception if like hormonal contraception is so bad?
Okay, so we have a bishop here,
Oh,
and we're practicing Catholics, and Catholics, I actually have a paper on our website. I wrote about Humani Vitae and hormonal contraception, what the scientific basis was. I mean, it was very prescient for him, Pope Pius, to write this encyclical about not using contraception, but he predicted that women would get objectified and contraception would become mandated and not elective. He predicted all those things, and it's very, very short. It's such a short encyclical, very easy to read. So I would direct you to that. But if you weren't Catholic, first of all, there's natural family planning. And what that is you are fertile about 100 hours a month, okay? 4.5, 5 days. And you can know when you're fertile. And it's not the rhythm method where you're counting the days and stuff like that. So when women will go to the bathroom and use toilet paper and wipe themselves, sometimes they'll come up with this long stringy stuff that looks like egg white. That's S cervical mucus, that's when you're fertile. And there are other signs that the woman can tell when she's when she's fertile. Now this is a problem because they did a study at the University of New Mexico where they looked at the tips that lap dancers made when they were fertile, not fertile, or on the pill. And the women who got the most money were the fertile ones off the pill by $100. It was about a 30% difference in the amount of money. So women who are fertile are much more attractive. And you naturally want to have the marital embrace when the woman is fertile. That's when you're most attractive. That's when she's most, So if you the statistics on natural family planning in terms of how good it is, it started with the ovulation method that the Browns developed in Australia. And one of the women that collected urine so they could measure her progesterone, estrogen levels in the urine was Mercedes Williams. Did you ever hear of her, Mercedes Williams? She's from Guatemala. Her brother was president for a little short period of time. And she became very interested in natural family planning and developed a system that could be taught to everybody, literate, illiterate, it didn't matter. And so in 2011, she took me to Shanghai. And we went to the Planned Parenthood Institute there. It's not associated with our Planned Parenthood. It's their, research place, and they train doctors. And I met these two little Chinese OB-GYNs. They were like this tall. They were old now because the studies were done in the late 60s and early 70s. And the Chinese wanted everybody in birth control because they didn't want a big population. They thought that was bad for them. So they were putting IUDs in everybody. So Mercedes went there at their request, and she taught them that NFP method. And statistically, her method was taught and worked just as well. And since then, there's been a lot of other methods. Like sometimes people use temperature in addition to cervical mucus. So there's a lot of different ones out there, but they do work. They're not the apps that you get on your phone. They're not the counting methods. The other thing that you could do is a double barrier method. If the man uses a condom and the woman uses a diaphragm with spermicidal jelly, and they do that every time, there's no way they're gonna get pregnant. So you can, the barrier methods, if they're combined, and knowing when you're fertile and practicing abstinence when you're not, are ways that you can avoid hormonal contraception. But you've been brainwashed to think that that's the only thing there is. So I can understand that.
Yeah.
Having been brainwashed myself. Because I graduated college in 71 and medical school in 75, so that was just a very bad time. Very bad time.
Well, the
Yes.
value of is still contraception.
Yes, yeah, it is. It is, because it's like you're saying to your partner, I want to share everything with you, but not a kid. I don't want to get that close. I don't want to have that kind of, and go ahead.
I've heard like sometimes people using the hormonal contraceptive pill to regulate a woman's cycle or something like that. Aside from contraception, that's never indicated. You would say.
That's crazy time, because, this is what happened. On the TV they advertise Seasonique, like take this and you only have to take it 4 times a year and you won't get your period for 3 months. Well, actually, when they were developing the pill, you wouldn't get your period. Well, women didn't like that. Men didn't like that. Why? They weren't getting their period. And if they don't get their period, how do they know they're not pregnant? So women on the pill are not getting a period. They are getting withdrawal bleeding after the cessation of the hormones are withdrawn. So they're not getting a real period. It's all fake. Not only that, they're taking a group 1 carcinogen for breast, cervical, and liver cancer 3 weeks out of 4. And our bodies were not designed for that. The estrogen is so potent, it's measured in parts per trillion. So it's very, very potent. And as I said, you can't name anything that doesn't have estrogen receptors in it. So you're messing that up. What else did you want to clarify anything
No,
else?
like I've heard from children, a woman has an irregular cycle, she takes it.
That's crazy. It's crazy time. You have to figure out why she has a regular period. It may be that she has polycystic ovary, and maybe if she took some metformin and treated her diabetes, she'd start ovulating more regularly. It's so crazy. They say we want you you have PCOS, you have polycystic ovary system, you need to be on the pill. Because that way you'll have a period and you'll clean out your uterus every month. But then they advertise seasonique. Like, why get your period? You don't need to have your period. You know? Take it and you only have to have a period 3 times a year, 4 times a year.
So what we generally know is the pill, is that hormonal birth control?
Yes.
Okay.
So hormones are either the ethinyl estradiol, with the progestin. There are estrogen-only pills, but people got really sick on them, so they don't really make them or push them. And there are progestin-only pills. And now this is what they're doing. You know what? Abby Johnson of, Unplanned. Okay. So what happened to her? When I was at this conference, and she was mad because she said, people aren't telling people about the pill. And so I brought her one of my books, and I said, yeah, I do. And so she interviewed me one time for a show, and the reason she was so mad is that she got blocking the name, pseudotumor cerebri. She was getting these very bad headaches, and they were affecting her vision. And she went to an ophthalmologist, and he says, you have to get off the pill. But her headaches and all that stuff never really got completely better. So she really hates the pill. So I'm on her, one of her podcasts, or one of her, I think it was video too. It was Politely Rude, or Rudely Polite, or something like that is the name of it. I'm bad that I can't remember the name of it. But
Earlier you mentioned that women that are on DHC, they tend to find mates that are most similar to them. What's the reason? And I thought that naturally from the beginning of time, people that were more similar to each other would come together.
no, you want to have, so you want to have more different types of genes, because in these particular genes, you want to have a wide diversity, because there's so many organisms that could kill you. So many different bacteria, so many different parasites. And so one gene might enable you to kill a certain parasite, but another gene wouldn't. And you don't have that gene, and your mother or father, have really different ones, they'll make a stronger baby that has more different types. So you want to marry the person over the mountain, across the river. You don't want to marry somebody in your own tent, or in the tent or the house right next door. Because if you have, like the Hasidic Jews or the Mennonites and stuff, they intermarry a lot. And they have a lot of genetic diseases that will run in those populations because of that. So you want something different, so you want dissimilar. So the pill makes you want similar.
But if you don't mind me saying, most females who do take the pill, whether they're secular or a little bit more, you could say left-leaning or whatever, they're not going to marry their family. They're going to be living in a big city or a suburb and meeting somebody that's a stranger, basically. So I don't understand that theory.
So that was the basis of his research, why that would happen, and what's the basis of it. And it was felt that it was based on the difference in pheromones, so that on hormonal contraception, how you react to pheromones changes. So oxytocin, it's like Like if you're having sex with somebody and you have an orgasm, there's a whole bunch of oxytocin that makes you bonded to that person. And a woman on hormonal contraception doesn't feel that same bonding. You know, and they actually did studies to see what would happen to relationships where somebody met somebody while they were on the pill, then they got off the pill to have kids, and then they got on the pill again, whatever. And what was going on in those relationships? And they did find that women who met their mate and kept on the pill, except for having kids, were less attracted to their partner and considered divorce more, frequently, less sexually responsive. But they didn't act on it because they were better providers. So a woman has to say, if I'm going to be pregnant, I need somebody to take care of me, and I need somebody to take care of my child. I need a man that's a good provider. So even though they're less satisfied in their personal attraction to their mate, but if they did divorce those couples, it would be the woman that initiated it, which I thought was kind of interesting. There's a huge amount of literature on that, huge. And your jealousy went up in proportion to the amount of estrogen that was in your pill. So low estrogen pills had less jealousy than high estrogen pills. And it didn't matter about the progestin. Like, progestin didn't affect jealousy in one way or another. So it's a lot of biochemistry. Yes?
Hi, so you mentioned earlier that when a woman is pregnant, she has hormones that affects the breast, which makes her more prone to breast cancer, but then she also develops in the placenta cancer-inhibiting chemicals. Is that the link why a lot of is that the link to the abortion breast cancer?
Yes. So when you're born, you kind of have very rudimentary breast tissue. And men and women have breast tissue under their nipple-areolar complex. And if you look at it under the microscope, they're kind of primitive, and they might be like one of those cul-de-sacs with 4 or 5, say 10 things sticking off it that eventually turns into glands that make milk. But then, if you're you start to cycle in puberty, and your estrogen and progesterone levels are going up, your breasts start to develop, right? But you're making some type 2 lobules, which are more developed, have more things that turn into glands sticking off of them. They look different under the microscope. And they are different. They have a higher number of lower number of estrogen and progesterone receptors in them, and different biochemical things that make them different. But it's only when that tissue is exposed to the hormones that you develop when you're pregnant that it matures into milk-producing cells. So that's called terminal differentiation. And a lot of cancers will start in stem cells. People who've gone through a pregnancy have fewer stem cells in their breast than women without a pregnancy. So that's why in the Middle Ages it was only the nuns getting breast cancer. Because everybody else, it was like Romeo and Juliet, they're getting as teenagers, and they're getting pregnant right away, and they were wet nurses. But the nuns largely were not having children, so they were the ones getting breast cancer. So that's why if you go through a pregnancy that lasts at least 32 weeks, and a full-term pregnancy is 40 weeks, if it lasts at least 32 weeks, the human placental lactogen that's made by the fetal placental unit because the placenta is part of the baby. We get rid of it when we cut the umbilical cord and toss it. But it's part of the baby, and it's making hormones, it's doing a lot of stuff. So that's when they become capable of making milk. That's why if you have a pregnancy, a premature birth before 32 weeks doubles breast cancer risk. Because you've made all this breast tissue, but you made a lot of type 1 and 2 lobules, and all those form cancers. You don't have enough of the 4 that are making the milk. So that's why if you, like they had these studies where they were saying smoking causes breast cancer. Another study says, no it doesn't, it reduces breast cancer. And another one said, no, it has no effect at all. And then this really smart Canadian doctor said, I'm going to separate them according to whether they had a kid or not. And what he found out was that if I gave you a cigarette and you hadn't had a kid before, your risk of breast cancer went up 600%. Because benzopyrenes and cigarette smokes are carcinogenic for the linings of the milk ducts. But if you had a kid and you smoked, one of the metabolites of nicotine in the smoke is cotinine. And cotinine is an aromatase inhibitor, and your estrogen levels actually got lower if you were postmenopausal, I think. So you had a lower risk. So it all depended on when you got exposed to the cigarette smoke. So that's how big an effect having and the earlier in life you have a kid, the lower your risk of breast cancer. And why is that? Because like you could be like me, who waited till she was 41 to have her first and only kid. And all those years between the time I got my period, say I was 10 or 12, and 41, I had like 30 years worth of maybe carcinogens, the pills, cigarettes, whatever. And if I had had a kid early on, I would have, those exposures wouldn't have been nearly as bad for me. So there are sociologic things like that happen that cause women to have more breast cancer now. But they do have more breast cancer now. When I was graduated medical school in 1975, grandma got breast cancer. Premenopausal women did not get breast cancer. Grandma got breast cancer. And then by the time I started specializing in breast surgery, it was like in a 1 month period, I had 3 30-year-olds with little toddlers come in with very aggressive breast cancer. And their history was like, one of them was actually on this DVD, she was my patient, Nancy. She got put on the pill when she was 16. She started having sex, and then she got pregnant, and then she had an abortion, maybe more than one, and then she finally met some nice person, got married, had a baby, and 2 years later had really bad breast cancer. She's actually alive and doing well right now. But she's one of the patients on this DVD that linked her abortion with breast cancer. So on this DVD, you can there's a 10-minute version and a 26-minute version of it that talks about the epidemiology and the physiology and the testimonies of 3 women. You can get from our website. Anyway, yes.
Thank you for all this research and for this lecture. And it came up to my mind, you mentioned autism while unplanned pregnancy, while women on contraception, and all those.
If they conceive while they're.
Yeah, and research on like fish
Yeah.
and everything. And I kind of think now, about those young people gender challenges these days.
Yes.
And would that be, is there any research or any questions?
I don't know of anything,
While
but
while
can you
their
imagine a
mothers,
male
yeah.
child developing in an
Yeah.
estrogen-rich environment that's too estrogen-rich? I wonder if, it's really interesting when they do MRI studies on what parts of the brain light up in men and women and in people that are lesbians and homosexuals. The straight women and the homosexuals will have the same MRI stuff in terms of what their attractions are and things like that as the opposite. I'm like blanking right now, but I know that references in a couple of papers that I wrote that are online, so I do think that that could have something to do with it. I think some of it is the behavioral stuff, like they get the little boys get molested when they're really young. I had a friend that was an intern, a resident that I was teaching, and he had a girlfriend, an ICU nurse, and he was going to marry her. And he went down to Mexico and got crabs, but he got crabs from a male. And so the ICU nurse was very mad and said, listen, you need to see a psychiatrist, which he did. And he said to the psychiatrist, could I be gay? And the psychiatrist said, oh yeah. And then he met this man who he knew from other circumstances, whose wife died of breast cancer and had 2 teenage children, 1 girl and 1 boy. And he started living with him and eventually married him and took care of the children with him. And what he said to me was that he really liked this guy, he really loved him. He didn't like the sex, but it was a good family. So I think that is just so complex. So if you're, an embryo in utero and you're exposed to a lot of estrogen, you're a kid growing up and your brain is developing and you're going through puberty, and your groundwater is contaminated with estrogen, and it's enough to change fish genitalia. I mean, that's huge. So I don't see, so you say, well, how come people don't do research on that and they're doing it on fish and they're not doing it on people? Is because we don't want to know. Because if we knew, what would we have to do? So sometimes I'll give one of these lectures. This happened in Soweto in South Africa. And I gave the talk about the abortion breast cancer link and hormonal contraception and breast cancer to the nurses in this medical complex they have. And the nurses loved it. Oh, great, we're gonna, we'll tell our patient. And then I gave it to the OBGYNs, and there happened to be some sort of a test or something that they all had to be there that day for. So there were 26 of them. And I gave them the whole thing on abortion breast cancer, and the guy says, hey, after the lecture, what are we going to do with this? I said, well, it's just information for you to have and to use any way you want to. And he talked about how this was like in 2003 when there was like so much HIV in South Africa. I have a HIV pregnant woman who's 24 years old with bad TB. What am I going to do? So they thought the only answer was an abortion. But so we don't want to know. So that's why we don't know a lot about fertility drugs. So if you're a manufacturer of fertility drugs, do you want to know that they cause breast cancer? You do not. But every single one of those guys, before they started their patients on those fertility drugs, would send them to me to screen them for breast cancer. And if you're a doctor giving those drugs to have somebody get pregnant and ovulate and do all those things, do you want to know that the drug you're giving them is causing breast cancer? You don't want to know. So why would you do the study? So a lot of things aren't studied, but I do think that there's a physiologic basis and a brain basis for some of the gender dysphoria that's going on. I think some of it's mass hysteria, but I think some of it's like in the people, the transition, those people, I think that it is real. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. He decided to join us tonight to say hello to everybody, and he's the administrator /